We have film of what very nearly amounts to a real miracle. Survivors of a plane crash in the Chilean Andes. The plane went down 10 weeks ago.
I can assure you that being on that plane crash.
An old transport plane crashed in the Andes Mountains. 45 persons were aboard, given up for dead.
Their desperation for survival turned them into cannibals.
Had you been there, you would have done the same thing.
Imagine standing in a frozen graveyard, 12,000 feet above sea level. The air is so thin, every breath feels like drowning. The temperature is 30 degrees below zero. You are wearing a summer jacket. You have no food, no water, and the world has left you for dead. Now imagine staying there for 72 days. In October 1972, 45 people boarded a plane in Uruguay. Only 16 came home. To survive, they broke the ultimate taboo of human existence. But this isn't just a story about cannibalism. It is a story about a group of young men who looked death in the face and refused to blink. It began as a celebration. The Old Christians Club rugby team chartered Uruguayan Air Force Flight 571 to Chile. On board were 45 people, the team, friends, and family. They were young, wealthy, and invincible. They were tossing a rugby ball in the aisles, unaware that they were flying into a trap. The pilots made a fatal error. Believing they had already crossed the Andes, they began their descent into Santiago. But they weren't descending toward an airport. They were descending directly into a wall of rock. At 3:34 p.m., the right wing clipped a peak. It sheared off instantly, slicing through the tail like a guillotine. 5 people were sucked out into the void, still strapped to their seats. The fuselage hit a snowy slope at 200 miles per hour. It tobogganed down the glacier for 2,000 feet before slamming into a snowbank. The impact crushed the seats together like an accordion. Legs snapped, chests collapsed. 12 died instantly. For the 33 survivors, the nightmare had just begun. The first night was hell on earth. They were stranded at 12,000 feet in summer clothes, blazers, and light pants. The temperature plunged to -22 Fahrenheit. To keep from freezing, they piled the bodies of the dead at the torn opening of the fuselage to block the wind. They slept in a heap, sharing body heat, crying, and praying. Nando Parado, a university student, lay in a coma for 3 days. When he woke up, he learned his mother was dead and his sister was dying in his arms. They waited for rescue. They saw planes flying overhead. They screamed, waved, and used lipstick to write SOS on the roof. But the fuselage was white. The snow was white. They were invisible. On their 11th day, they found a small transistor radio. They crowded around it, desperate for good news. Instead, they heard a broadcast from Chile. The announcer said the search for Flight 571 had been called off. They would wait until the snow melted in January to recover the bodies. The world had declared them dead. Starvation is a slow, agonizing death. The body consumes itself, first the fat, then the muscle. Then the mind breaks. They had eaten everything. The chocolate bars were gone. They tried eating the leather from the seats and the straw from the cushions. There was nothing left, except the bodies.
Said, Roberto, you had it. You're going to die. That's it. A very nice sensation of heat between my legs because I was peeing on myself and saying, that's it.
The bodies of their friends were preserved perfectly in the ice. It started as a whisper, a terrifying thought no one wanted to speak. But as days turned into weeks, the hunger became a physical pain they couldn't ignore. They made a pact. If one of them died, the others had permission to use their body to survive. Roberto Canessa, a medical student, took the first step. Using a piece of broken glass, he did what was necessary. They didn't do it out of savagery. They did it to see their families again. They turned the flesh of their friends into life. It was their only way out. Just as they adapted to this hell, the mountain decided to kill them again. On October 29th, day 17, while they slept, a massive avalanche broke loose above them. It slammed into the fuselage with the force of a freight train. They were buried alive. Packed in snow inside the metal tube, 8 more people died that night, suffocated under the weight. The survivors were trapped inside the buried plane for 3 days. 3 days of total darkness. 3 days of sleeping next to the fresh corpses of friends who had survived the crash, only to die in their sleep. When they finally dug their way out, the realization was crushing. The mountain wasn't just indifferent, it was hostile. Staying at the fuselage meant death. The only way out was to walk. It was a suicide mission. They had no climbing gear, no ropes, no compass. But Nando Parado was driven by a singular obsession. I refuse to die here. On December 12th, 2 months after the crash, Parado, Canessa, and Vicentin set off to the west. They believed Chile was just over the ridge. They climbed for 3 days. They slept on ledges carved into the ice, freezing together in a makeshift sleeping bag sewn from plane insulation. When they finally reached the summit, 17,000 feet high, Parado looked out, expecting to see the green valleys of Chile. He saw nothing but mountains, endless white peaks stretching to the horizon. They were nowhere near the edge. They were in the middle of the Andes. Vicentin gave his rations to the others and sledded back to the crash site. Parado and Canessa kept walking. "We are walking to our death," Parado said, "but I would rather walk to meet my death than wait for it to come to me." For 10 days they walked. They walked until their shoes fell apart. They walked until they had no strength left. Then, on the 9th day, the snow began to thin. Then, a cow. And finally, across a roaring river, they saw a man on a horse. Sergio Catalan, a Chilean muleteer. Parado tried to scream, but his voice was gone. He wrote a note on a scrap of paper, wrapped it around a rock, and threw it across the river. It read, "I come from a plane that fell in the mountains. I am Uruguayan. We have been walking for 10 days. We are weak. When are you going to come to fetch us?" The man nodded and rode for help. The nightmare was over. On December 22nd, helicopters rescued the remaining 14 survivors. When they returned to civilization, the world was stunned. They were called the Miracle of the Andes. But then the truth came out: the cannibalism. The media frenzy was brutal, but the families of the dead absolved them. They understood. It wasn't a sin, it was a sacrament. Nando Parado later said, "The mountains didn't want us. They tried to kill us with cold, with avalanches, with starvation. But we beat the mountains." They spent 72 days in a frozen hell. They lost their innocence. They lost their friends. But they kept the one thing the mountain couldn't take: the will to live.